What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning into the Uncommon Mindset podcast. Today, I'm joined by someone who I would say is uncommon amongst uncommon people. Today, I'm joined by Zach Bitter. Sorry. An American ultramarathon runner who holds the world record for running 100 miles in 11 hours, 19 minutes, and 13 seconds, and the 12-hour distance run world record of running 104.8 miles in 12 hours. Zach has also shattered the 100-mile treadmill world record, completing 100 miles in 12 hours, 9 minutes, 15 seconds, which broke the record by 21 minutes and 21 seconds. What an honor it is to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
No worries, Zach. So I just want to start off by asking, when and why did you get into running?
Yeah, so I kind of got interested in running at a pretty early age. My primary school or middle school is what we call it here in the States. Was they do this program called the Presidential Physical Fitness Challenge, and essentially it's just like an assessment of a variety of different like physical activities, and one of those was the 1 mile run. And of all those activities, I was much better at the 1 mile run than all the other things like the pull-ups, the stretches, the shuttle runs, which were a little more explosive type events. So that was kind of like the first clue in for me at a very young age, like what sports maybe I'd want to focus on if I wanted to, find myself with a little bit of natural talent there. So that kind of got me started, and it just kind of progressively got more interesting to me as I got older through high school and college. And then by the time I finished college, I had a pretty good understanding of just like the ins and outs of different training techniques and things like that, and which ones I preferred and which specific workouts I liked the best. And one thing I took away from that experience in college was that my favorite run of the week or workout of the week was the long run. So it didn't take too long after that for me to discover ultra marathons. And then in 2010, I did my first ultra marathon, a 50 miler or 80K race in Wisconsin called the North Face Endurance Challenge Midwest Regional. So that doing that race was the first time I had run over 30 miles. The first time I had raced over a marathon, and I was pretty hooked after that. I did wait a year to do another one, but after that following year, I was completely hooked, and I haven't really focused on anything but ultra marathons since then.
Nice. Yeah. What is it about running that, like, what was it about that hooked you? Was it like pushing yourself, or what was it that you really thought like, look, this is what I want to do now for the rest of my life, basically?
Yeah, I think really what kind of stuck out to me in those early days, and I probably didn't really realize it as much at the time, the part I did realize at the time is one, like if I wanted to go up to like track and field day and win an event, it was probably best to skew towards the longer distance stuff. So, being young, you usually gravitate towards what you're better at. So that having that opportunity to say win a race or, finish in the top portion of a larger group of kids my age was definitely appealing. There was also just something kind of, I think, unique about the way you kind of push yourself through an endurance event. And, at the time it was a mile. So I would consider that a very short endurance event in general, and certainly comparatively to what I do now. But the same kind of like feeling or sensation was there where you have to kind of pace yourself. It wasn't like a lot of the other sports I did where you were just like, how quickly can I get up to full speed, and how long can I hold that before I have to slow down and, wait for the next play or wait for the next event or something like that. So there was just like this difference to it where I felt like I was a little more, it just came a little more natural to me. So just trying to kind of understand that and get more experiences with it was kind of a driver for me in those early days.
Nice, lovely. How do you like prepare yourself to do something as crazy as, the 50 miler or even the 100 miler? Like, how do you prepare yourself, like, both mentally and physically, to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's definitely some value in ignorance at first, and with just like not necessarily having a good understanding of what you're getting into. I think worked well for me, like in those earlier stages for some of those early 50 milers. And then certainly the first time I ran 100 miles, if I kind of had known what you're going to go through for, say, 100 miler ahead of time, it may have been, just a little more nervous energy there than what I ended up having. So, it really is an interesting sport in the sense that it's kind of fringe enough, and there isn't a ton of great research around like proper training techniques, or I shouldn't say proper training techniques. I think we do have a good grasp of like some pretty like fundamental like things that are likely going to yield better results than others. But within that area of like what is workable, it's a pretty wide open range, and that kind of like so you have a little bit of this kind of like give and take between, you know, what's going to help me mentally or psychologically with this event, but not necessarily put me behind from a physical standpoint, and just kind of like working back and forth with those two things. So the one example I can share to kind of do that is I'll have folks sometimes who've never run, say 100 miles before, and they're going to do it for the first time. And there's maybe a little bit more of a goofy training technique or something that they want to do. And, you know, we talk about kind of how it could negatively or positively impact like the physical aspect of development, or what we're taking off the table by doing that, versus how is this going to help you mentally wrap your head around what you're going to be doing in the later stages of a race like that. So there's a lot of kind of like more like big picture things like that. But then there's also just kind of learning how to really leverage your training to help with the mental side of things too. And I think one thing that I've learned since I've ran my first ultramarathon to today is that the more you can try to like kind of mentally visualize what you'll be doing in the end stages of some of these longer events that you can't really train up to in training. Like if I'm going to do a 100-miler, I'm not going to go and run anywhere near 100 miles in any one shot unless it's another 100-mile race, which is likely going to be probably 4, maybe 6 months prior to that. So you do have this void in terms of like short-term points of reference as to like what it feels like at mile 80, or what it's going to feel like at mile 80 of a 100-miler. So by taking like, say, a long run on the weekend, if I'm going to do like a 30-mile long run, just really kind of visualizing from the start of that long run, pretending I'm at mile 70 of the 100-mile, just kind of work through what I want to visualize, how I want to focus, and give myself those like points of reference that are within the training block. They're going to help me work through the mental phases of the end stage of the race, where things can oftentimes get a little more difficult to stay focused for. And keep things moving. So that's been a real helpful point. If I can do that on like a handful of long runs leading into the race, then when I get to that point in the race, I don't feel like I'm so far removed from it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I was listening to, I'm sure you're aware of David Goggins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was listening to him on Joe Rogan, and he said that when he runs, he doesn't listen to music. He said it's like cheating in a way. Do you ever like listen to music or like podcasts or anything like that just to take your mind off running?
Well, hopefully David doesn't hear this podcast, because he's going to think I'm a huge cheater. Yeah, I think I've seen some research on music and listening to stuff during runs. And I think it's a little polarizing. There's not really like great evidence supporting it, or necessarily like negating its effectiveness. So when you have situations like that, where it kind of is like a coin flip based on what we know, or we just don't have enough information on it, I just tend to kind of lean on my own experience and what kind of like bears fruit for me in training and things like that. So what I found is like music can be a great tool, but it's like any tool. If you overuse it, it's going to kind of lose its value, or its high end function. So I try not to use music all the time. And if I'm like doing a race, I'm not going to listen to music the entire time. I might use it as a way to kind of break through a low point, or just to kind of break up the day. One thing I think is just a really valuable tool for anyone doing a long race, long endurance, is getting comfortable with a process of kind of chunking the event. So like, it's almost impossible for me to like wrap my head around a 100-mile race and start thinking about that finish line, that 100-mile like completion starting at the very beginning. If I do that, I'm just going to wear myself out mentally over the course of the day. But if I'm able to kind of focus on, say, just getting to the next aid station, or if it's a short loop course or a timed event, like getting to a specific distance or specific time of day, as a way to kind of draw my focus away from the entire task and focus on something that's a little smaller and easier to wrap my head around. So if kind of using music periodically throughout that kind of helps me break that up or identify those chunks, then I'm going to do that. So I will use it in training. I'll use it in racing for those purposes. In training, it's a lot more just like if it's a faster, more intense workout where I really need to kind of get my energies up for, I'll usually turn to music for those type of runs. Whereas if I'm just going out there for kind of an easier pace run, I prefer like a podcast or something like that, because then I can get a couple things accomplished. If it's something I'm like a topic I'm interested in, want to learn more about, I can just download a podcast about it, listen to that while I'm running, and get the workout in as well as learn something on the way.
Yeah, of course. I love what you said there, because basically in January, what I did was I ran 15 kilometers every day for the month of January, and I done it to raise money for the a children's hospital in Swansea. And when I was doing it, like you said, like breaking it down, because when I was thinking, like, when I was sore some days, I was thinking, I wasn't thinking about the 15 kilometers. I was thinking about like let me hit 5 kilometers, let me hit 10, let me hit 15, and that's a great point that you mentioned there. Yeah, for sure. I was also like, I'm a huge fan of ultra runners as well, and I really enjoy watching Courtney Dauwalter. And when she was doing the Moab 240, she mentioned that she started like hallucinating and seeing like tigers play like violins and stuff like that. So I wanted to ask you, do you ever get to that stage where you're hallucinating, or like your vision's going like blank or anything like that?
Yeah, Courtney's way cooler than I am. So she, she's got some really interesting stories, and I think like one of the things that I'm most impressed with with Courtney is, out of anyone in the sport, men or women, I can't think of someone who has as big of a range as she does. She's competitive all the way down to like 50-mile or 80-kilometer races. And then she's doing like these 240-mile runs out on the trails. And then to add to that range and distance, she's also done world-class performances on a variety of different terrains, from a 400-meter track, to like UTMB, the most competitive 100-miler on the planet, and winning that. It doesn't get much different when you're running, say, 24 hours on a 400-meter track, or running through the Swiss Alps out in Chamonix at UTMB or something like that. And for her to be able to put up the performances she has on both those events is just mind-boggling. So it doesn't shock me that she's had some like kind of crazy out-of-body experience, especially with those longer efforts. For me, it sounds maybe silly, but I've skewed maybe a little to the shorter side of ultra marathons, at least to date, where my kind of primary like bread and butter type of event is like these flatter, more runnable 100-milers, where I can usually get them done between like, say 11 and 13 hours. And that seems to be kind of my sweet spot. So for those, I'm not really dealing with a whole lot of sleep deprivation or things that would induce, leopards and hammocks and and blindness and things like that. So who knows, maybe as I kind of branch out into some more multi-day type stuff later in my career, some of these longer single day events, I'll have some more experiences like that to share. But the closest I can say I've gotten to stuff like that is I have gotten quite good at just getting myself into like this like state of just almost kind of like what you'd call like, I guess, a flow state or a meditative state, especially on these like longer, more monotonous type events where the environment isn't very stimulating at all, especially if you're on like a short loop 400-meter course. You've seen the entire thing when you're 1/400th of the way into the event. And for those type of events, you kind of just need to get into like a kind of almost a trance so that you're not getting bogged down by the monotony or the uniformity of the event itself. And, when I talk about kind of dress rehearsaling for these events with my long runs, that's one thing I'm usually focusing on, is how do I kind of get myself in this like almost this meditative flow state where you're doing what you need to be doing, and you're like kind of subconsciously paying attention to different metrics like, am I thirsty? Have I been staying on top of my fueling and fluids and things like that? Where's my pace at? Am I like hitting my splits, that sort of stuff? And you get really good at being able to kind of do that intuitively versus having to like really burn a lot of mental energy thinking about it. And that's kind of my sweet spot. I haven't gotten quite as good at getting into that kind of a state on some of the more trail, like steeper climbing and descending type events. And some of that's probably just like relatively less experience on them, those type of courses. But yeah, no crazy hallucination stories for me, unfortunately, not yet.
No, it's fine. What is next for you now? Because obviously I know that you did the treadmill 100 miler and you actually broke the record on that as well, which is incredible. Like, what is next for you? Like, are you looking to do something more than that, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I've got a few exciting things coming up this year, which I'm really looking forward to. Two are kind of repeats on or close to things I've done in the past, which are going to be a couple 100 milers. I'll be likely doing the 100-mile US Road Championships in Nevada this April, and assuming the event holds. And then the race where I broke the world records for the 100-mile in a 12-hour. There's 6 days in the Dome at the Pettit Center is going to be happening at the end of June this year. So I'll likely be doing that one as well. And that'll make up kind of my first half of the year. In the second half, I'm focusing on this really big project I've been working on, actually coming up on a year and a half at this point, which is, they call it a transcontinental run, where you run from San Francisco to New York. It's about a little over 3,000 miles on foot. You just see how long it can take you to do that. And essentially you have like, a crew and an RV kind of following you along the way, and you see how many miles you can get until it's late enough to go to bed, and you go to bed and you hit repeat. And right now I'm kind of doing a dual target with that. So the record is by a guy named Pete Kostelnick, who he averaged right about 72 miles a day and finished in just under 7 weeks back in 2016. So if I can be anywhere near his pace, I'll be thrilled. So I'll be kind of loosely targeting that to a degree. But the kind of primary purpose will be, there's a charity here in the United States called Fight for the Forgotten. And their focus is kind of twofold at the moment. One is they're building wells and farms for the Pygmy tribe in the Congo, and helping them kind of gain basic human rights and things like that, as well as developing curriculum for school districts in the United States to help with bullying prevention stuff. So raising awareness and funds for them is going to be kind of the primary target of that project. But that'll be a kind of a 6 to 8 week effort if things go well. So it's going to eat up a big chunk of my second half of the year. So right now I'm just kind of focusing on having that be the primary or only thing at the moment. We'll just get through that first and see what's left on the calendar for 2021 before planning anything extra.
That's crazy. That is actually crazy.
So I might have some good hallucination stories for you after that if you want to do another one.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. I know that obviously, apart from running as well, you do coaching and stuff like that as well. How is all that going? Are you finding that like rewarding, giving your knowledge to other people?
Yeah, I really like it. I've been coaching a fair bit from a pretty early time frame. So there's a few things that I really value from that experience. And, one is I originally went to school to be a teacher, and I did that for about 5 years in Wisconsin before, deciding to step away to focus a little more on coaching and training and racing and that kind of side of things. So the coaching part kind of gives me a little bit of that, an opportunity to kind of use those skills I developed as a teacher. And it's also just kind of, as I've learned more about the sport and fine tune, it's just it's a pretty cool like growth experience to look at too. When I look at just like the way I would train or program someone else's training back when I first started coaching versus what I would do now, you can definitely see growth and just like learning things from the sport. Some of the stuff is just due to like innovations that we've learned between when I started now, and some of it's just, me getting more content rich in terms of what I've been able to kind of discover and learn from other people on. And so that's really rewarding too, is always being able to kind of have this practice where you're doing the best you can with what resources we have available to us, but also having this kind of like plane of work where there'll likely be new information that comes when more research is available and more high quality studies are done that are going to always kind of keep you on your toes about continuing to develop and continuing to learn more about the sport, and keeping your eyes and ears open for that information as you're helping other folks kind of reach their goals and that sort of stuff. So that's been one of the more rewarding things about the sport, as well as the coaching side of things.
Yeah, no, of course, that's amazing. And how do you do your recovery? So let's say, for example, you've run 100 miler.
Mhm.
How do you recover from that? Like, does it take you I'm sure it takes you like a couple of weeks to recover from that, right? Is there any process that you do or anything like that to help?
Yeah. The first time I really gave it a lot of just kind of like constructive, like kind of like, here's the template to work from. I got a lot of, I kind of based it off some of the stuff I learned from Ian Sharman, who's a 100-mile, I guess I'd call him a 100-mile specialist for the most part. He's been top 10 at Western States on 9 occasions, 9 times in a row, actually, and has done really well at a variety of different 100-mile stuff. And he always would say that when you finish a 100-miler like that, you want to give yourself kind of a couple weeks away from structured training, or at least away from the way you would train, say like in the middle of a normal block. So he'll go like a complete week off from running. He won't likely run a step for that first week. In the second week, he'll start kind of doing some hiking, some low impact, low intensity stuff that just gets his body moving again, but isn't going to generate a huge training load or a huge impact load on his body. That's still probably at least partially recovering. I kind of put my own little spin on it too, where I'm probably less likely to do that second week of just hiking. I might start doing some running in that second week, or even maybe a little bit in the first week. I'm just going to make sure I'm not holding myself to like having to do it. So if I wake up, say on the 8th day after 100-mile, and I feel like going for a run, but once I get out there after 30 minutes, I'm not really motivated to be out there and no longer want to be doing it. I give myself the affordability to just stop right there and give myself that full 2 weeks if I want, to let everything catch up both physically and mentally. There's one thing I've kind of realized by going through it and trying a few different strategies there is sometimes your body will recover faster than your mind. And then you want to get back into training, and you do. And then, you're 6 weeks into the next training block and you're just a little mentally defeated and wishing you would have taken a little time away to kind of hit the reset button on the mental approach, and just how much kind of willpower you're bringing into that next training block to get the most out of all your workouts. So I found that kind of giving myself that 2-week window is usually kind of a great kind of starting point. And then I can always, flex it out from there if I need to too.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. What does your diet look like? Like, for example, let's say you're getting ready for a 100-mile run. Are you eating a lot of calories, or what does that look like?
Yeah. It's interesting because, when you look at just like my calendar year, there's some pretty big polarizing variances, whether I'm like, recovering from a 100-mile or barely moving at all versus being in peak training and, training upwards of 20 hours a week and things like that. So there are days where I'm basically eating my resting metabolic needs, which are probably right around 2,000 calories or so. And then there's days where, I'm doing back-to-back long runs where I might be eating 5,000 plus calories on each of those days. So it does range quite a bit, but for me personally, I just kind of, I try to account for the energy demand and try not to get too far off from that, especially once I get to where I feel my kind of ideal race weight is. I try to make sure I'm really on top of getting enough during that, because when I hit that point, if I get behind nutritionally, that's when you often start feeling flat on workouts and things like that. So once I get maybe a third to a halfway into a plan, I've typically am kind of getting close to where I'm at that point where I have to pay a little closer attention to making sure I get enough. From there, I pay pretty close attention to kind of like just macronutrient ratios. For me, since my kind of peak events or goal events are quite long, the intensity is rather low compared to a lot of endurance events. So what I found works well for me is kind of keeping my fat sources a bit higher, my carb sources a little lower on average, just to kind of like leverage my body's ability to utilize fat as a fuel source for those longer efforts, and reduce the amount of intra-race or intra-workout fueling I need to kind of lean on in order to keep my energies consistent. So that could be anything from maybe a little bit of what would we call like a stricter ketogenic diet during the off season, all the way up to what would be like kind of more of a middle of the road, low carbohydrate diet during the middle of the season, where I might, say hit like around 20% of my intake coming from carbohydrates when I'm doing some of those bigger, longer workouts.
Yeah, no, amazing. I gotta ask you. Obviously, I mentioned him earlier, but have you ever met David Goggins?
I haven't. No. I'm obviously familiar with his stuff, and would love to meet him down the road at some point. So it looks like I'm going to have to jump into like a 200 miler though if I want that opportunity. He seems to lean towards those these days.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm just asking because a lot of like me and my best friends, we're really big fans of David Goggins, and we really enjoyed watching like ultra marathons and stuff like that. And just listening to him is kind of crazy because of like the mindset he has. And it
Mhm.
seems like a lot of the ultra marathon runners, they have a similar mindset because there's nothing like pushing yourself to the limit and then pushing yourself even more. And David Goggins mentioned the thing where if you think that you've hit 40%, if you think that you've hit 100%, you've only hit like 40% of your max. So just keep going. Do you think that like that's what you think of? If you ever feel like giving up or anything like that in a race, are you ever like, okay, like it's just my mind just playing games with me. I just need to keep going. Are you ever like that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's maybe one of the more interesting things about ultra marathoning or even endurance to a degree where you are walking a fairly thin line where you need to be asking yourself, am I just being a little complacent here and need to push through this workout and just get it done? Because once I get moving, it's going to feel good and I'm going to be glad I did it versus getting to a point where you have maximized the physical output side of the stimulus, and now it's time to step back and let the recovery phase kind of take its hold, and you can like realize those benefits. So what I think sometimes people get confused with in endurance is when you go out and you do a hard workout, you're not going to get faster from the actual doing of the said workout. You're going to get faster from recovering from that workout. So if I go out and I hammer a really hard workout that I know is going to take some time to recover from, then, if I wake up the next morning and feel unmotivated to go out and train, that may be because I shouldn't go out and train, and maybe because I'm supposed to rest, let that training stimulus set in and then grow from it. And then the next time be able to do a little more. So it gets tricky because it's always a moving target. So like when I first started running, I could get to that point by doing about a third of what I do now sometimes. But over a decade plus of running and just kind of gradually moving that needle a little further and further, you get to that point where you just need more to generate that kind of stress recovery response. So that's what makes kind of endurance running such a long-term process, or where you see folks have like a really good training block and then nail a race. Everyone wants to know about what they did in that training block, when in reality, they need to be looking at what that person's been doing for almost the last decade in order to really understand what they've done to get to that point. So everyone's kind of an individual case with this. And it depends a lot of times on their history, what their training load is been like historically, what they need to elicit that stress recovery response, and ultimately, find themselves improving versus stagnating or stepping back. So there's some ways to kind of track that too, make it a little easier, where you can pay attention to things like, well, what is my pace at a given heart rate, or what is my pace at a given perceived effort. And if you notice things are starting to kind of plateau or regress in that department, chances are I'm just not recovering. So that doesn't do me any good to go out and then push through something in that scenario. Versus a case where I'm steadily improving, and then I wake up one morning, I'm just kind of like bored or unmotivated, and I decide not to go out and train because it just doesn't feel good. And sometimes you have to push yourself through those type of scenarios. And the way I like to look at it is there's a time and a place for that. Like when I'm peaking for a race, there's going to be times where I really kind of reach for that sensation of like, all right, tomorrow I'm not going to feel like getting up and doing this run, but I got to do it because I know it's going to make me better for the race based on my prior experience. And those are times of the year where it's maybe a little more fair to do that. But in order to be able to sustainably do that year after year, you also have to be able to leverage your off season, leverage your down weeks, and make sure you have rest days in there from time to time to let everything kind of catch up and improve.
Yeah, no, of course, no. Honestly, thank you so much, Zach. I really appreciate, you being on the podcast. I just want to ask you one question now before I let you go, because I know obviously you are a busy guy. What would you have told yourself if you could go back in time? What would you like tell your younger self?
That's a really good question because I mean, I think about that and a lot of times I think of just some of my earlier years in running where I just had no clue like what you could do in terms of like developing. So like when I think of my high school and especially my early collegiate years, I was definitely like not training nearly as hard as a lot of my kind of competitors, certainly at the collegiate level. And part of me wonders like, well, if I would have given that a little more attention back then, maybe I would have placed better at state in high school or, found myself going to nationals in cross country and track as a collegiate athlete versus, just making the conference meet or something like that. And part of me, the curious side of me does wonder what that what would have happened that. But then I also recognize that to a degree, I may be where I am today because I didn't overthink it or overdo it and just kind of took it as a little more kind of fun and exploratory in those early years. And maybe that's what made it continue to be exciting and motivating for me. So I guess I'm probably on the fence as to whether I would tell my younger self any of the stuff I know now. I think if there is something I would just tell myself would be just generally speaking, like not not to rule out anything. I know there were points in my running career where I thought it was essentially impossible to run 100 miles a week and that I would never actually do that. Whereas, now obviously I'm doing that in a single day. So it was a limitation I maybe placed on myself mentally that wasn't necessarily one that was appropriate. But, stuff like that, just like kind of like those more general recommendations of, being patient and trusting the process. And then at that point, the sky's the limit.
Of course, yeah. The way I look at it is like everything happens for a reason, right? And whatever's happened in your life has shaped you into the person you are today. So yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much again, Zach. What I'll do, guys, I'll put Zach's social media down below. Go and check him out. Honestly, this guy is crazy. Go and check him out. Hopefully, you'll run from San Francisco to New York. And you'll obviously break the record for that. That'll be amazing. But yeah, I just want to say thanks again.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. It's always fun to chat about ultra running and everything else. So thanks for the invitation.
No worries. Thank you.